You're going to Squamish unless you're going to Vancouver. So, and there, we don't have Handy Dart up there either, so they're beyond Squamish anyway.
Oh, join
So there's, yeah, see, we're all rural.
Yeah, that's right.
So what's happening, just as a matter of interest for the Sea to Sky, is that there's been a long-standing desire to see a regional transit service put in place. The funding issue is the trick. It often falls, it's usually a 52-48 split, but 52% being for the municipalities. But the municipality also gets a fare box. So there's a reduction there. Any remaining balance is covered by the municipalities and by the local governments. There is an issue around how that is allocated. So when you look at the Sea to Sky, the property tax assessment allocation is pretty lumpy. As in Whistler has 65% of the assessments. Squamish is growing, but then there's the remaining rural areas. It's expensive to service all these areas.
Yeah.
So the desire of the local governments in the area was to create a commission to provide the service as opposed to a regional district service. And then, which they did do, they made application to BC Transit. BC Transit formed a commission. The commission was to have commissioners appointed by, and that's what would require an order of council from the province of British Columbia. So that was supposed to happen in December. I don't believe it has. I haven't heard that it has anyway. Then once they're appointed, that commission will make recommendations to the government, to the province, about how the funds are raised, and the initiative is for a fuel tax levy. Now there is, in fact, in TransLink's catchment, there's a 17.5 cent levy, and
Which is gonna disappear when we're all buy electric cars.
Well, this is true. There's a diminishing return, no question about it. And I think there's an additional $0.015 going on in April 1st, so it'll be a 19-cent differential. Then there's a 3.5 cent or so. I can't remember, on BC Transit levy in the rest of the region. So there should be about a 15-cent differential in fuel prices between Metro Vancouver and Squamish, or West and Whistler. No, in fact, in some cases, Squamish is more expensive. So you've got to wonder what's going on there. But the idea that the commission had, once they are appointed, will make a request to the province for a 6-cent fuel levy, which should cover the municipal portion of the cost of providing service to a regional transit service in the Sea to Sky. There had been a commitment, I think we made a commitment back in 2016, I want to say, to fund the provincial share of that regional transit service. The problem was, how do you pay for the rest of it? And local government was not super keen on putting it on property taxes.
Understood.
Yeah.
So if there was a new regional transit service, if that gets established, would you be well, I'm just wondering about the idea of Horseshoe Bay as a transit hub. Is anybody advancing that idea at this point, or I'm just worried that it'd be too late?
No, certainly not. Horseshoe Bay is a transit hub as recognized in the Sea to Sky Transit Future Plan.
Okay.
Lions Bay is also a community that is considered and has made their concerns known under the previous administration about wanting to improve their service and their access to services. But how Horseshoe Bay fits into this whole thing is it's not entirely clear to me at this point, because it's depending on what you're doing. If you're really trying to get commuters from Squamish to downtown, does it make sense to go into Horseshoe Bay or not? And do we have these direct services as well as having some more rural services? Because is it going to stop? It's got to stop in Britannia Beach. Is it going to stop in Furry Creek?
Yeah.
You know, is it going to stop at Seascapes? Is it going to stop at Lions Bay? Is it going to stop at Caulfield? You know, then all of a sudden you're taking an hour and a half to get to Vancouver. So this is, I'll leave that to the transit experts. But certainly, I think we all acknowledge that Horseshoe Bay is a transit hub that needs to be connected.
Yeah, and it could be just
Absolutely.
a shuttle, or it could be using the 257 as a shuttle, or some other bus that would stop, so people could get off and get down to, just because people are moving
Yeah.
more everywhere through the region,
Or
and
maybe
and the
it
fewer
takes
cars
that,
that come
takes the old
back.
highway and there's an elevator.
Yeah.
It's the
Good
people
enough,
that
yeah.
come to go to Whistler, come from Nanaimo,
Mhm.
Won't be able to get up there.
they can't get there from Horseshoe Bay. So if you wanted to get people out of their cars and riding a bus up to Whistler, train or whatever, I mean, they left that part. So that's part of what they need to think about in the design of the new terminal too.
Yep.
And, you know, which you remember the meetings we had with the Ministry of Transportation way back when they were redesigning the Horseshoe Bay Ferry Terminal, and they didn't want to consider access to the highway.
Well, I think there, certainly for Horseshoe Bay, there are, certain, my experience with Mr. Collins is that he is open to all sorts of different alignments. And I don't think he is entirely married to Horseshoe Bay either in terms of capacity. You know, at the end of the day, does it make a lot of sense to run everybody out to Horseshoe Bay or not? And how do you know, but there's also the provincial government has a responsibility and a desire to influence where BC Ferries in terms of where their priorities are. As you know, there was some discussion about different ways of getting to Vancouver Island, and you know, there's a political aspect to it as well.
There certainly is, yeah, there's no question. The
Have-
transportation is basically, you know, we've got severe transportation problems over here. We don't service half the island, so then everybody's driving down to the Cove, get on the ferry, et cetera, the parking.
Yeah.
And the Cove is getting maxed out. We need something to alleviate the pressure on the Cove. And so we really need a passenger ferry, and probably not over the Cove, but anyway, that's another discussion. Seymour Bay would be awesome, but.
Is that over the golf course?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So that'd be perfect. So we're not gonna we're just gonna keep pushing that passenger ferry thing and just see where it goes. And I think that's a great idea, of getting together with everybody again and saying, you know, can we revive this, or is there any potential right now for this to happen?
Maybe we just look at what you think, we could probably try and dig out Sharon, we maybe dig out the previous, the assessment, the ferry assessment. And then,
Upgraded in 2010 too, for the 2010.
well, I think it was done in the early 2000s for 2010, for the transportation plan for the
that's when they were
Olympics.
doing that early,
So
okay.
we can,
yeah.
we'll try and dig that out, and then maybe it's something that you guys have
It would
to
be
look
helpful
at.
to have a look
Certainly
at
be
it.
Yeah,
updated,
sure, that's
outdated.
75.
And then see what we can also do about coming up with a cost estimate on,
Yeah.
of updating it, and then we can all work together to try and put together some partners.
Yeah. The other thing, of course, is we had a ferry going from here, which was very well subscribed to downtown, a passenger ferry, and we lost
Water
our,
taxi.
dockage down there. No, I don't, David, you have.
Yeah, I've talked to the city of Vancouver about fixing up, it's the wharf down at Cole Harbor.
Yeah.
And they'll look at it, see what they can do, maybe it'll get fixed up. I mean, I had a conversation with a counselor who suggested to me that I write a letter saying we needed that, and so I did that, and
Yeah.
I
Any
did not-
response?
I haven't got a response from him, I'll talk to him at the next board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
See what happens.
I think the idea of looking at the airport is interesting as well. Because the airport's it's pretty straight from here, you're not having to go all the way into the inner harbor, and you can connect up potentially with Canada Line.
It's an interesting one, because I've driven my boat up there a long time, and it takes you 10 or 15 minutes to get to where the Fraser, north arm of the Fraser comes out, but then it's another 10 or 15 minutes up the dock. There's a lot of logs in the water, and it's a long way, and you
Yeah.
gotta be fairly slow,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
So it's an interesting thing.
But I
Well,
think as
yeah,
they
yeah.
talk about a passenger ferry from Nanaimo in, we don't, I think Iona is one of those places.
They're looking.
Oh, really?
Oh, they're
Yeah.
looking
Oh,
at
that's
that
pretty cool.
rather than the Seabus.
I think they're looking at a variety of different places,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
you know, I think that area it's obviously a lot shorter.
Yes, yeah, and it services a much wider population.
Yeah, potentially right on those rapid transit routes or
True,
connected
yeah.
to them, so I think you gotta keep
Gotta use them,
gotta keep options open, yeah.
Yeah, we can't take everybody door to door these days, can we? Unfortunately.
That'll come.
It'll come.
That's gonna
Without
be-
a driver and
Yes, driver.
That's Jamie absconding, yeah.
Okay, fighting our way through this list here. Update on a meeting with Minister Heyman, re the park expansion.
I can speak to that, and
Thank
this
you.
is really just a bookmark, that it's something that we need to do at the appropriate time. It was mentioned when we met with Minister Donaldson. It relates in part to Metro Regional Parks plans for park acquisitions in the coming year. They've got the plan is in place. They have not made decisions as to which areas they'll pursue for expansion, but there is an appetite and there is funding in the budget going forward for doing so. The Parks Committee has not met.
Sorry, there's a appetite and a budget
And-
for
and the
what?
Metro Park.
Oh, the Metro Park,
Yeah.
requiring,
Cribbin Park to
Expansion, yeah.
expand on Bowen,
is
to
it,
take in part of the areas up in here, so that would be part of the areas that were slated.
so you don't want to put
Perhaps
under
for
Flynn
logging.
Row, eh?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, it all connects up, I mean, the ruralness, the protection against logging and so forth. But I should just be cautious here in that Metro Parks is not specifically set, and we're pursuing expansion into Cribbin Park.
And so what does the Ministry of Environment have to do with this?
Because if you recall, at the meeting with Minister Donaldson, he said if we want to start talking parks, we need to speak with Minister Heyman.
I think he was referring to making it a provincial park. That was my impression.
Okay.
Oh,
I'm
You don't see him as
frankly,
having a
from,
role in
it
this?
really would go from Flynn Row
Yeah.
and Crown Lands. There'd actually be a consultation and accommodation piece with the First Nation as well. But then it would go from Flynn Row into Metro Parks. And so I don't think BC Parks would have a whole lot to
Okay,
do with it.
okay, then that's a confusion as
Okay,
well
yeah,
within
okay.
Flynn Row, because the
Right.
fellow I spoke with, Williams, had mentioned this being important to.
I kind of got the same sense from just my reading of the material, but anyway,
Well, we've got
The same
that,
sense in what way?
that the Minister of Environment would be important, but maybe it was to do with provincial parks, you know.
Yeah.
but
could it
provincial
easily be
parks,
confused?
Clarification,
they've got that
yeah.
agreement for the trails, right?
Yes, we have.
Tom
an
Gardner,
agreement.
and that's with provincial parks, so if you're gonna start dealing with, but it's a local.
Provincial park, how's the provincial park
Well,
associated?
resource, parks and recreation, trail sites.
You've got rec sites and trails, that's
Are
Flynn
they
Row.
under, oh, that's Flynn
That's
Row?
Flynn Row, yeah.
Oh, okay, so,
Okay, so there's a nest of things here that
Yeah,
need to
we
get
need to.
untangled,
Yeah.
and it's not appropriate to move forward with this.
No. Not at this time.
And if Metro is interested in proceeding with any sort of park expansion, they will get in touch with us through appropriate channels.
so that's a stay tuned.
That's a state of, yeah.
And that's sort of all the stuff we had down here. Sue Ellen?
well, I had one more thing, if there's time, and it just relates to BC Hydro. Because we had some concerns about, Bowen Islanders are interested in solar projects and other kinds of renewable energy generation of energy. And I discovered with the idea of a solar co-op, or, you know, could the municipality put on a bunch of, like New West, I was thinking maybe we could put solar panels on these new buildings that we're building, and could we create some kind of solar co-op on Bowen, for example? And, but BC Hydro has recently applied to the BC Utilities Commission to get the rules changed so everything, so that only households or businesses can do it for their own particular building, just on that footprint. And if they generate more energy, then they need to,
They can't sell it.
they can't sell back the
Yeah.
extra.
The net metering.
No,
Yeah,
net
net
metering.
metering, thank you, that's the word.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just, I gather, and I was thinking, I don't understand this idea of over-generating or over-producing renewable energy. Seems crazy to me in a world facing climate change and climate crisis, and also interested in the fact that BC Hydro apparently is one of the challenges in getting all the electricity down to the water shore to
Horseshoe Bay.
enable
Horseshoe Bay.
electric ferries, Horseshoe Bay being an example. And I'm just interested in how is BC Hydro like BC Ferries in that they're completely separate from government, or are they a government?
It's Crown Corp.
Crown Corporation.
It's a Crown
And so it is different than
It
BC
is different,
Ferries.
yeah.
All right, yeah, I guess I did know that. Anyway, I'm just,
I
I
think
was
that-
just a bit surprised by BC Hydro being, sort of not supporting the ideas of
Net metering.
producing renewable energy and people being more self-sufficient.
but-
And
but-
as an island, we need to be,
My.
excuse me,
Okay. I thought
as
you
an island, we
finished,
need to
sorry.
be self-sufficient to a degree, and especially in case of emergency and things like that, you know, and the idea of putting some kinds of
Alternative power.
alternative power.
Yeah,
Anyway,
absolutely.
it just seemed like there was no way forward through BC Hydro for those things, or to support those things, or to help you as a municipality with those
I
things.
think,
Gary, can I add?
yeah, go ahead.
So my understanding of the issue that BC Hydro was having when we met with them up at UBCM.
Yeah.
Were you there with us at that meeting?
It's the abuse.
Was, there's one particular example they quoted where somebody had put up a whole solar farm on a storage shed. I don't think they even had a house on the property. And they were selling all that back into the grid, so they were getting a big check for it.
Mhm.
And BC Hydro's idea of the net metering was that I put solar panels on my house, and when I didn't need that solar energy, there was excess, then they would put it as a credit against my bill.
Which is
And-
fine,
And I was talking to somebody on the phone 2 days ago who's done exactly that, and that's exactly what happens. But their issue was this person was turning around and getting paid themselves for, so they were doing an independent power project in a way.
And what would be
Yeah.
wrong with that?
Yeah, I guess my question
Well,
is,
the idea.
are there any suggestions you would have for what we can do as a municipality to encourage BC Hydro, to encourage and empower everybody to find renewable energy ways forward that help mitigate climate change? Because it doesn't seem that there's a principle within BC Hydro that has anything to do with helping against climate change. And I'm
Well, I
not
think
sure-
just the fact that they're buying back the power,
I think that net.
I think
metering
that's a
was
start, and
Yeah.
that user thing is
Yeah.
a good start.
It's more for municipalities, yeah.
Oh, no, they're still gonna do it for individuals.
Well, for
Anyway,
residential,
we're
yes.
sort
for
of talking
residential.
about it among ourselves. I guess I haven't really formulated, I didn't have it on the agenda,
They,
because I didn't really
BC
formulate
Hydro
a
has
real
no
question.
issue with residential, it was this guy selling it to them. And I would think probably in economic terms, if they were gonna be buying from an independent power provider, they would have a negotiation and a price and all that sort of stuff. And buying from them at the price we're paying for residential would be probably quite different from what they might pay for an independent power producer.
I would agree with you. I think there's a big difference as well between dispatchable power and intermittent power.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem. It creates a real difficulty for them if they have an unsurge, exactly. You know, they have a whole bunch of excess power, and then they need to be able to store it somehow. So as storage becomes more robust, then in a variety of different technologies, then I think you'll find that there is much more willingness to just take all renewable and intermittent energy that's available. But at this point, I don't think that I think Allison is quite right in terms of getting around the clean energy calls by, realistically, if you're gonna put up a mega power, you should have to have somebody should have to agree to buy it, as opposed to a couple of kilowatts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But, I think they're recognizing, of course, that our grid is pretty clean.
Yeah.
And so we're not, this is a question we get regularly about why not subsidize panels.
Yeah.
Well, why subsidize to offset clean energy?
Mhm.
Doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, but as you point out, when we look at transitioning the transportation fleet off of fossil fuels,
Huge,
Yeah.
huge, man.
yeah, I think 75% of the energy we consume in British Columbia is still fossil fuel oriented.
How much, sorry?
75% of the energy, the global energy that we consume.
Yeah.
Right, right, right.
And
Including
so-
transportation fuels.
Including
Yeah, right.
transportation fuels, and so that will have to change.
Yeah,
And that's the sort of the 2050
Yeah.
target of the 80% reduction. So, and typically if BC Hydro wants to subsidize something or install something, then, or make something accessible, then they have to go to the BC Utilities Commission
Yeah.
for permission to do that.
yeah.
And I think that it's just this, they're trying to get ahead of it to avoid other circumstances where all of a sudden you've got somebody generating,
Yeah.
3/4 of a megawatt of power only for 6 hours a day. They get this big surge, they have to pay for it, and really not need the power at the time.
Well, especially if they can't store it.
No, and that's where storage is the trick. And so, there's opportunities, I think, in a place here where you maybe reuse your water, for example. Is there a place that you could use renewable energy, pump the water up the hill, and
Yeah.
then
Storage.
store it, and then use it, and then run it back down the hill at night and power the island?
Yeah, absolutely.
They used to
There
do
are
that.
options.
There used to be, apparently Minnie Davies used to go and open the gate at the top of the
It's legit.
Bridal Veil Falls, and
Yeah.
all the lights would come on and down there. Yeah. Anyway, just a local example, very small, long time ago. But the idea of, thank you, just the idea of BC Hydro being responsive to the need for action on climate change just didn't seem to be in any of the communications around these topics. And so I'm not sure, does that direction would then come from the province, right? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Maureen?
Just, again, not on the agenda, but just a bit of good news. We are going to have high fiber internet connectivity.
Shaw is here, right?
Shaw is here. So
That's
the
great.
official announcements are still pending, but some people are feeling the benefits already.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, we really see the benefits are over the, sort of after dinner time when everybody's on
Not
Netflix or
working its way
whatever.
down my way.
Really? Because it's sure working in my place. Yeah.
Yeah.
No interruptions anymore, the
That's
speed is just
fantastic.
lightning fast. It's kind of subtle. If you didn't actually think about it consciously, you wouldn't notice it was happening.
Also, one of the tips online is to reset your color.
What do you mean, how do you reset it?
We can talk about this after the
Oh,
meeting.
yeah.
Plug it back in.
So the printer will work.
So,
The router and the printer.
Is there any more questions from council for MLA Sturdy here?
Yeah, I was curious about what your response was to the Clean BC plan. I mean, you had all that experience on the climate leadership team. How'd you feel when that came out? What did you think of it?
Well, it's interesting that other than the 2030 target, there wasn't really any changes in the targets. So it's a matter of how you get there, I suppose. And the big initiative was the requirement or the prohibition ultimately on selling non-clean energy vehicles after a certain period of time. And so that's ambitious. I tend to believe that well, it'll be interesting to see whether those targets will be, in terms of the transportation vehicles, will be necessary, or whether the market will drive it. I think that, there's a competitive aspect of things, the maintenance cost of clean energy vehicles, so it's less, performance is less, or performance is better. Operational cost is less, and we just gotta get the capital cost down. And then,
It's coming.
exactly, it's coming. And, in my case, I have a Volkswagen, and I guess, and I get good mileage, it's a good car and all that, and I'm thinking that by the time I go to trade it in or get rid of it, what I'm seeking is 500K. Like for you guys, you don't need 500K,
Well,
rarely,
you can ride
rarely.
back from Pemberton to Vancouver without having to stop for.
Well, and plus I wanna be able to do it in the middle of the winter when it's -20 and I've got the heater on, and I've got the defrost on, I've got the windshield wipers on, I got the lights on, and,
All those things using power.
exactly, all those things using power. So we're not quite there for me, but I think in another 4 years, we will. And so you know, and I think also we'll see capital costs come down as more manufacturers get into the business. And so it'll be interesting to see whether those regulatory targets are necessary.
Your gas goes, or it's not gonna be worth much anymore, is it?
No, exactly. Unless, of course, and I think, you know, it's interesting, because you look at a company like Carbon Engineering, which is looking at atmospheric carbon capture, so taking carbon right out of the atmosphere and converting it into a fuel that is identical to your standard fossil fuel. And, you know, but in terms of road transportation, is it actually ever gonna be necessary? By the time they scale up that technology, it may be that battery vehicles or electric vehicles, which are ultimately better anyway in terms of moving parts and, you know, maintenance costs and operational costs.
Charging at night.
Yeah, exactly. So, but now we still need other transportation fuels. I'm not sure if planes are gonna be, helicopters are gonna.
It's planes and heavy trucks, so it's all, it's gonna
Yeah,
take a while.
yeah, and then also I think some of the ocean shipping will also continue to be a problem. So there'll be a need for those transportation fuels regardless, but,
Yeah, which are a big part of it, unfortunately.
yeah. But I think we're certainly going in the right direction.
All right. Thank you very much, Drew. Now, for the members of the public, we got about 10 minutes or so. You've all been very patient and very attentive, and if you've got something to say, come on up, or just stand up, whatever you want to.
Yeah, Tim Rhodes.
Tim Rhodes.
Minister Dix is apparently a fairly big fan of community health centers. Do you know if there's going to be any programs in terms of capital or operational funding?
No, I don't know, and that's an excellent question. I've been working with Minister Dix on a number of different initiatives, and this is actually a good opportunity for me to get back up to speed in terms of the health center file, as it were, yes, as it's evolved over the years. Yes. As well as going back to coastal health, because I don't think we ever got the numbers, did we, Sharon? Do you recall? You know, we've had numerous requests into CO Olson, Karen Olson from Vancouver Coastal Health about the expenditures that BCH makes on Bowen and off Bowen, but for Bowen residents. And to try and help build that business case for the development of a facility here. So it's a good reminder.
With the tap data for the ferry, we can get through ferry.
Yeah, yeah,
I think I found that.
that's part of it.
That's part of it, but a lot of people don't bother with it.
No, that's true.
Well,
They don't think about it, or they're in
No,
distress.
but we don't know what services they're providing.
No, and this is what I think I'm
Yeah.
really interested in.
We know how many
is-
go over, but going for something, you may still have to go, but what are the services that people are going to access?
And what's coastal health coming over here to do
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah.
So, but no, that's certainly something I can talk to Minister Dix about.
Thank you.
And so that's
You can help us information.
I'm sure we do. We have Tim's contact information over here. But it's, it's capital cost that you're most interested in?
Well,
Capital
both really,
contributions.
would like to investigate both.
But in a lot of the other communities that, you know, we visited around and seen some of the health centers that we've seen on some of the islands, they're operating offices and providing services out of those, and so there's, I mean, a commitment at some point for that kind of funding too, right?
Yeah, well, and there's two
Yeah.
levels of community health centers. There's ones that are related to BCH, and then there are the ones like we're building
Rural.
or private.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I was imagining though there was a BCH component to the clinic here.
Yeah, well, certainly we had the fellow from Pender Harbor down, and they're funded to the tune of $375,000 from BCH to run various programs.
Yeah.
So,
Yearly, annually?
Yeah, no, that's good information, because that's the kind of thing I was trying to get out of Ms. Olson, was, you know, what is the cost to VCH of providing services on the island, or specifically on the island, that we could transfer, or we could capture some of those costs in a clinic here to help pay for the operations of the clinic. And then the other piece was how we looked at what services that we're requiring the residents of the island travel off island to receive, and how do we quantify the cost to the taxpayers, but also the cost to the citizen of you know, spending a day going to dialysis. Now, is there enough people here to support a chair? Is there the staff? What would it cost to put the staff in? Is it more cost effective? And what we're trying to do is build a business case so that the VCH says, well, if we spend this money here, we can provide better service at the same price. Sort of that's what was my approach anyway, but the Pender Harbor piece is, that's an interesting one, so to break down that 375 and see how relevant that is to
to
Bowen.
us, yeah.
Yeah,
Especially since they can drive to the hospital in half an hour.
yeah.
Yeah, which isn't the case here, for sure. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Dean McCarthy, 2 quick comments, one of them anecdotal, one of them stale. This summer I was at a barbecue in Langley and there were people from Chilliwack there that had lived there for a number of years. And unprompted by me, they started complaining about how the logging proposals they were getting and that they seemed to go up and up and up, and they had it to here with, they have found out that they are the end of the line.
Yeah.
And we might run into.
The Bowen's logging is happening.
No, believe me, I didn't say nothing. I didn't want to volunteer any information that might be used against us. I didn't say anything, but they had figured out that the licensee, when they got pushback from elsewhere, they just finished it off in Chilliwack. And they were saying that that's not going to happen anymore, that what they were presented with at the beginning was what they were going to hold them to. So I thought, okay, that's worth passing along, because we might not be as successful as we were
The next
last time. Okay? And the other thing is sale information, but a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't changed. About 20 years ago, an engineer relative worked for AMEC, and he had to run a study with Gibson's and Bowen for a substantial commuter water taxi. It would run 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon and evening. And a client paid them for this. And he said there was a huge interest in Gibson's and in Bowen. But where the proposal fell apart is the Gibson people that were really interested, and the price was wonderful. If it stopped at Bowen, they were no longer interested.
Good point. Wow.
Was it added too much time to the commute?
Added too much time. If they would only be interested, some of them said they would even pay a little more money.
To
if
not
it was
stop.
direct, but not if it had another stop.
Hmm.
So I thought, and one last thing.
Yeah.
On my way here, between Melmore and the Cove,
Yeah.
4 Shaw cherry picker vans.
Yes, the little blue Shaw vans, everybody's all
That's
excited.
good. Something's happening out there.
I was honking way back then. Sorry, if I might, what was the name of the company that did the study?
It was AMEC, it's the huge, they're an international company, and somebody just asked them to do it.
AMEC.
AMEC, yeah, and that was a good 20 years ago. He was working there, and they said, oh, when you have time, hire some people to do this. And when we mentioned we were moving here 14 years ago, he said, oh, he had done a study, or headed a study, and that he was surprised that that many people in Gibson's were no longer interested.
Wow.
But do you Is the study public, do you know?
No, it
Nobody?
was done for a client.
It would just
Oh, something
be
private.
nice to be
It
able to
would
get
be
some
private, yeah.
info.
You don't know who the client was by any
Not
chance,
a
do you?
clue, no.
No, I remember we had a fellow working with us at Rocky Mountaineer who ended up with Translink.
I've got the report he did.
Have you?
Yeah.
And from the airport out to Squamish, including Bowen Island and everything else. They did a, very in-depth study, and it seemed very feasible, but they just couldn't get any feet on it. I don't know, but that's going back 15, 18, 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it wouldn't have worked out so good in that big storm the other day.
Yeah.
All the ones we're having, actually, for that matter, but, you look at Sydney Harbor, and it's just awash with ferries, there's ferries everywhere.
Yeah.
And you gotta say, well, why can't we do something like that there? And it's a population problem.
Well, it's interesting, I had a meeting with Mark Collins a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about Sydney, and we were talking about TransLink and Port Metro, and there's a new committee that consists of TransLink, Port Metro, BC Ferries, and I don't know, one or two other entities, and they're looking at transportation issues around Metro Vancouver. And Mark said to me the way that one of his comments was, we've got an underutilized resource here,
Yeah.
and that is the water. So, let's look at something like the train, what is it called, the one that comes in from Maple Ridge.
West Coast.
The West Coast Express, and there's a limited amount of track out there, and that track is in demand.
Yeah.
And Mark suggested to me that he had put out there, and I don't want to speak for him or, say what his thoughts were, but just that maybe there's an opportunity to mode shift as well. And, could we run from Port Moody to downtown? And what would the timeline look like? And let's not forget, the water's there.
Yeah.
And it's underutilized in a way where we look at Sydney, that is, it's a complex harbor, but it has many
Oh, yeah.
ferry services.
There's probably, it's gotta be about 8